Hello, welcome to Sunday. Hi. Okay, so we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to move quickly. I've made myself a little outline so I can stay on track. As you can see, Miss Shelley Belly is here with us today, so she will be running around as she needs. All right. First of all, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. I hope everyone is having a lovely Thanksgiving holiday, lovely Thanksgiving time. Assuming, of course, that you are having Thanksgiving at this time. If not, I just hope you're having a lovely weekend. Okay, so I said I'd be doing some updates, so here we go. So I think I'd always planned on splitting this book up anyway. So I think what I'm going to do is finish book five, called Book Five Done, at the end of round two of the tournament. So projected, that's chapter 36. I'm currently writing chapter 35, almost all the way done with it. So it may be 36, might be 37. Who knows? I have a tendency to keep going, so we'll just see. All right. Then at that time, of course, I will pause the reading, work on the edits, make the cover, put the book together. There's a bunch of stuff that's got to happen. You know how that is. The book will probably be about 280,000 words, which is huge. I know most people don't know how many words most books are because it's not something that Amazon splashes everywhere. But anyway, that will be bigger than Gathering Mage. So that was a huge, thick book. 280,000 words is bigger than I think all the Harry. It's bigger than the first three Harry Potter books put together. I know that. Um, anyway, so it's big. Um, so let's see. So we're going to finish out the book, finish putting it together, do the cover, do the thing, throw it out there. And then I think the next thing is going to be a small writing in a new world. So it's going to be a cultivation novel. Um, so it's just going to be, I'm going to keep it short if I can. Looking at maybe something small like 100,000 words or 80,000 words or something like that. Um, basically, if you remember, there was a part in one of the books where he is with Mother Creation, and he can see somebody moving between our world and a world that's deeper in towards the source of creation. Um, and so that is another whole series that I want to write. This is not that. This is just a little, kind of a little, I don't know, just a little thought in my head. It's about this little guy that loses his family and ends up being adopted by a cultivation academy. Um, he doesn't have any powers or anything. He starts out in the kitchen. Um, and it's his adventures as his cultivation journey starts, and it's not the traditional journey, and he's not the traditional little guy running around doing cultivation stuff. And it'll be fun. It'll be kind of neat. So, kind of what I'm thinking about for this is to use all the logic and the rules that I'm creating for the teacher that's come over in the Fledgling God universe. So this is a world that's closer to the source of creation. Magic is it's not known as magic there. But basically, it's much more plentiful than it is on our world. Cultivation is alive and well, and it's a way of doing really fantastical things. Um, and so it kind of lets me create a world and rules and all the stuff that I need. And what more fun way to do it than to create like a little story and put all that together. And then when I return to the Fledgling God universe, then at that point, that's where the teacher is trying to bring some of those teachings and rules into our world. And so Jason and the crew will be picking up from that and having a good time. So it's obviously not necessary reading. But for me, it gets my stuff together. And then in the future, I want to create another series that's, a guy goes from our world to their world. They have problems, and so he grows. and his magical abilities and cultivation abilities, and it's kind of another world-shaking, world-ending type story. This little story is not that. The world does not depend on this little guy in the kitchen. Um, but I think it'll be fun. So anyway, just yeah, just kind of neat. Maybe a bonus story if you think of it that way. Um, the other thing I've been looking at is a place to do something better with posting my writing. So as you know, of course, we had the lovely uh, YouTube, and then I've been posting the docs, and so then I've had some trouble with various people scraping them, or I've ended up with like I don't know, somebody comes along and says, "Hey, I'm Prince in Nigeria, and I need blah 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 blah," and so it's showing up in the Google Docs. So anyway, so I don't want any of that. So I've been kind of you know putting a document out there and then taking it off, putting it off, taking it off. It's not the best way, especially because I know a lot of you love to go out there and read the story as well as watch what we have and keep up with all the everything going on. And I would love to just have everything out there. So I was like, how can I do that? So I started originally looking at my website, which is hosted on WordPress, and it's complicated to work with. And I don't know. I couldn't just leave it open because, again, anybody can scrape and comment on WordPress. That wasn't what I wanted. So it'd have to be behind some sort of password, something. In order to do that and make it free, it's got to be some sort of newsletter that comes out. I don't know. It was complicated to set up, and I was just like, I don't know if this is going to be the right way to do that. So I was looking at that. I then started looking at like Tumblr, which is a simpler um, blog posting place. But like the biggest thing with all of them was if you're just coming, you just want the latest chapter, then you can just look at the latest blog post. That's great. But what happens if you have just met the books and now you want to start over at the beginning and read, like book five, like right now? Where would you go? How would you go find previous chapters? Well, because of the way the blog's done, everything would be in reverse order, and it's not necessarily easy to go back and figure out where the start was, what I was doing. Also, if I'm skipping around a little bit and I'm writing in my new little world with the boy in the kitchen, and I'm also inspired to start writing Fledgling Guide book six, and maybe I'm posting from both of them at the same time. Again, that would just take a blog and just blow it out of the water. So I was just like, there's just got to be a better way to do this. Um, so then I started looking at World Road, which they have a lot of lit RPG and progression fantasy and cultivation, and that's like their main thing. So I really started looking at it. At the end of the day, after reading a ton of reviews and things and Reddit and blah 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 blah, basically I've decided not to go that way, mainly because they don't have an LGBT tag. Um, I mean, not even the old one, the LGBT, much less the LGBTQI plus all the different variations that they have now. They don't have a section for it. They don't have nothing. And apparently, some people who were writing fantasy that was also gay, they felt like it was more of a hostile environment, and I just am not up for that. I'm just like, nope, not going to go there. So then that led me to Wattpad. So that's WATTPAD.com. And so their specialty really is romance and young adult. But they do have an LGBT section, and they do have a fantasy section, and they do have cultivation tags and all the other lovely stuff they would have on there. They have urban fantasy, they have all kinds of good stuff. So even if it's not necessarily their niche, like they have all the stuff in there that I need in order to be able to post the chapters for you guys. And of course, everything's done because it's all about posting for books. So it's done in book format. So you'd be able to go to that book, the latest chapter. If you need to start it from the beginning, it's got a nice little index and all that good stuff. So anyway, I think that's where I'm going to move. And so probably over the next week and a half, I'll probably work on putting that together. Um, Let's see. The okay, so obviously a lot of you guys are on Kindle Publishing Unlimited. And so Unlimited says that exclusivity has to exist with KDP, Kindle Unlimited. So it can't have more than 10% of the novel posted somewhere else. So what I'm going to be able to do is put all my chapters out there while I'm writing it. But then as soon as it officially comes out on Amazon, there's an actual book. And at that point, I'll have to go back and hide everything other than like the starter chapters and put a little stub in there that says this is now on Amazon. Please go read it for free with KDP, or you know, buy the novel or buy the paperback or whatever it is that you want to do. So anyway, hope all that is good. So just letting you know, probably going to put books 1, 2, 3, and 4 with just little stubs out there, um, so that people can know what it is. And then book 5, here we go. Here's chapters. Here you go. Enjoy. Whew. Okay, so I know I've covered a whole lot on the setup. So I am terribly sorry about that. But all right, let's begin the reading. Chapter 32, The Beetles. Okay, last time we have, they've arrived in this cavern. It feels like Disney World in there, or what's that other one? Avatar. It's just beautiful. Glowy lights. Everything's lovely. Got a magic pond with water. Um, Annabeth rushes over and goes, "Ooh, lovely." Takes a drink. And Jason, of course, is like, how about we check it out first? Okay, chapter 32, The Beatles. Oh, I'm gaining magic, she breathed. It's the mark. It's filtering the magic from the water somehow. She hurriedly drank some more. I took another look around, but everything seemed quiet. My cartography skill wasn't picking up any enemies, and Annabeth seemed to be doing fine. Okay, I said grudgingly, but if this gives me the runs and I get a gravy stain on my new suit, I'm not going to be happy. You're immortal now, Annabeth chitted as she sat down beside the pool. A few microscopic bugs aren't going to hurt you. Now sit down and shut up. Or sit down and drink up. We need this. She patted the space beside her and took another drink. Annabeth was right. We desperately needed a source of magic. I was probably being cautious for no reason. I sat down beside her and cupped my hands in the water. It felt amazing and slightly tingly. It felt like I was in a spa, and this was specially infused water with extra minerals and electrolytes or something. It also felt welcoming, just like Annabeth had said. I lifted the water to my lips and took a cautious sip. It was delicious, absolutely delicious, like the best tasting beverage I had ever had. It was water, of course, but it reminded me a lot of bubbly wine, like Moscato. It tickled my palate and danced across my tongue. I swallowed, and the water soothed my throat. I suddenly realized I was parched and desperately wanted more. I took a second drink, much longer this time, and I felt it slide into my system, like I'd taken a tall shot of fireball. Yum. Best of all, I felt my mark of the deep earth wake up and take notice. It was still digesting the Rat King's core, so other than helping with my crystal, it had been comatose. Now the water was here, though. It wanted that too. It eagerly drank in the magic from the water, and now I could sense it had a specific flavor. The water contained magic from deep in the earth. Somehow it made its way up the surface. It had made its way up the surface, up to. Somehow it had made its way up to the surface, and over time it had infused the water with its power. It's like Earth tea, I told Annabeth, then realized I hadn't explained anything at all, but she still nodded. That's exactly it, she agreed. Earth tea, and my Mark is loving it. I drank another handful, And that's when I felt the most important part of this adventure. The mark of the deep earth took that tea, processed it, and pushed some of the magic into my system. Fresh magic. Finally. Best of all, my mark had already converted the magic for my use. It was in my colors. Well, mostly converted. It wasn't very saturated, but that was easy for me to fix. I'd converted so much neutral magic at this point that saturating a bit more barely took any of my attention. I drank a few more handfuls, and that's when my Mark of the Lagerel decided to get in on the action. It let me know that roots were uniquely suited for absorbing moisture and nutrients, and it wanted to have a go at this new power source. I agreed, of course, and soon it was eagerly absorbing the magic as well. After it got enough, it started pushing the overflow into my system. To my pleasant surprise, the magic it gave me was just about perfect. Annabeth and I shared a look of pure joy, but we didn't stop scooping the water and gulping it down as fast as possible. This water was literally life. I could see fresh pink magic seeping into Annabeth's matrix, just as new emerald green and sapphire blue were seeping into mine. The fresh magic felt so good, and I wanted more, much more. I needed to get Penny back to full capacity again. I needed to rebuild Red and the Hexagon network and make it even denser than before. I also needed to refresh my own personal matrix. I felt my best when my matrix was stuffed full and bursting with electricity. Annabeth leaned over so she was closer to the surface, and her scoops took less distance to travel. Then she knelt down and put her face right on the water. Now she could practically splash the water into her mouth, and I quickly followed her example. No matter how much I drank, it was still amazing, like it was the first drink. I was magically thirsty, and I wasn't going to stop until I had drunk my fill. Annabeth had been much lower in magic than me, so I'm sure this felt even more life giving for her. Anomaly detected, my bank crystal announced. You are being watched. Where? I asked. Is it hostile? Who was I kidding? Everything in the underground seemed to be hostile. Watcher is unknown, my crystal replied. Intentions unknown. I kept drinking as I scanned all around me. I didn't see anything, but now I knew what I was looking for. I could feel something. It was very faint, barely detectable. Whatever it was, they obviously wanted to stay hidden. I'm sure a regular mage wouldn't have noticed anything at all. My senses were incredibly sensitive, though, and my senses were incredibly sensitive though, and now I had a supercomputer of a crystal watching out for me. Since I knew someone was here, it was only a matter of time until I could figure out where they were. I sent Annabeth a quick message and told her to stay calm. We weren't being attacked yet, and I didn't want to give away that we knew something was up. We both kept drinking and didn't even look at each other. Until this unknown person made a move, our best course of action was to gain as much magic as possible. I finished topping up my own matrix and began working on Red next. If we were going to be fighting again, I wanted the most powerful shield I could get. Are you going to make any changes to Red? My analytical side asked. No, I replied. He's already got everything he needs. We know his defenses work well. I just need to make sure there are more hexagons than before. After all, having 10,000 hexagons instead of 2,000 will massively boost the amount of defensive force I could bring to bear. Fortunately, his fellow hexagons resize easily, so it's really just a matter of having enough magic. My analytical side seemed disappointed, so I gave him a consolation ice cream cone. It's always fun upgrading soul creations, but in this case, my time would be better spent my time would be better spent gaining as much power as possible. I did end up making one new creation, a straw. It helped me suck down the water even faster. The straw was so simple, it reminded me of the soul creations I used to make before my waker moment. Still, it was all I needed right now, and it got the job done. Both of my marks were loving all the power, and they also got something out of the process. I wasn't exactly sure what they were up to, but the aspect of magic in the water was somehow fueling their growth. I was just happy they were doing their thing so I could do mine. I fed almost all of this new power to Red, and it was fascinating watching new hexagons pop up and settle into the hex network. In a weird way, it was like blowing soap bubbles. As the new hexagons showed up, the older ones shrank, making room for all the new defensive magic. I started out with about 500 hexagons. That wasn't much, and the hexagons themselves seemed huge. That was all the magic I had to spare at the time, though, and it was better than nothing. When I reached 2,000 hexagons, I felt the intention of the Watcher shifting. Now it seemed frustrated, like it was expecting something to happen, only it wasn't. I reached 3,000 hexagons before I felt it shift again. Now the Watcher felt irritated. I messaged a heads up to Annabeth. I'm almost full of magic, she messaged back, just as my crystal spoke up. Hostiles incoming, suppressing non essential notifications. I sent my crystal a quick feeling of gratitude. It was doing a great job interfacing with my cartography skill and keeping an eye out for trouble. Then I checked my map to see where the enemy was. I was expecting to see something big and deadly, but instead it was quite small, about the size of a dinner plate. At first, I thought it was a turtle, but then I realized it had 6 legs and a shiny segmented shell. I'm not an entomologist, so I wasn't exactly sure what I was looking at, but it seemed to be some sort of beetle. Its eyes were tiny, but they glowed deep red, which made it look like it was demon possessed. That, along with its red tinged aura, let me know that it was at least as battle crazy as its larger ant comrades. I'd have thought beetles were small, but in true red eyed fashion, it had mutated to a more deadly form. Not only had it grown in size, it had expanded its exoskeleton to form a shell, like a box turtle. It had also expanded its mandibles until they were half again as long as its body. Even its legs were mostly tucked under its protective shell. Basically, this beetle was all about the defense and the attack. It also knew where we were, as it made a beeline right for us. It wasn't fast, but it didn't detour for anything either. In typical red eye fashion, it tore up anything in its path and managed to convey the impression that it couldn't wait to take a bite out of my juicy flesh. Have you charged up your shield charm? I asked Annabeth as 2 more red eyed beetles crawled through a hole in the wall. Actually, now that I looked, there were a lot of holes in the walls. Let's hope they didn't start spewing demon beetles. Not yet, Annabeth said tensely, working on it now. You better work quickly, I said as 3 more beetles popped out of 3 different holes. I got up and stepped toward the beetles to give Annabeth a bit more time. I was glad the beetles weren't moving that quickly, as it gave me time to figure them out. I'm sure there I was sure there was a learning curve on how to handle them, just like the ants. The first beetle reached me, and I gave it a good punch. I was curious to see how strong its shell was. To my surprise, the shell wasn't rigid. I thought it would feel like punching a rock. Instead, the segments of the shell spread out slightly, absorbing some of the force. I almost laughed as the beetle was using my own defensive strategy against me. Absorb, reflect, redirect. That was Red's playbook, and it was the beetle's too. It also didn't help that it was walking on moss, which was soft and springy and helped cushion the blow. Don't get me wrong, it was still tough and would have broken a regular person's hand. It's just that its design allowed it to have the advantage of both hard and soft, and I had to admire that. Of course, we were still on opposite sides of the fight. so I wasn't going to let my appreciation get in the way of taking this creature out. My next punch was already on its way, and this time I gave it some more gas. I focused the force rune on my hand and altered my tense on contact to allow for a bit of give. When I hit, the force went through the shell and the beetle exploded. The shell actually stayed together, but everything under it was toast. Watch out when you hit these things, I messaged Annabeth. They are really tough. I also included my thoughts about its design as I set myself up to receive the next tiny tank. This time I knelt on the ground and connected to the earth. When my dessert sized enemy reached me, I punched it from a greater base of stability, and it exploded right away. These things were certainly sturdy, but they weren't that bad. More beetles were arriving through the walls, so I had plenty to experiment with. I punched out several more until I was familiar with how they felt and the best angle of attack. Then I switched over to using Spike and the Knuckle Crew. That was a lot more fun. It took a tiny bit more magic, but my soul creations are incredibly efficient, and my spikes punched through them like bullets. It was nice, as I didn't have to punch as hard, and I could attack from different angles. Even though Spike wasn't very thick, the speed at which he punched through the shell used its flexibility against it. It couldn't expand anywhere near fast enough, and instead exploded apart. It wasn't long before I was surrounded by chunks of beetle carcasses. Clean up on aisle 3, I sent playfully to my bank crystal. It used all that extra processing power to figure out my humor and put the dragonfly in motion. Soon, the points were rolling in. How many points are these worth? I asked. It is unknown at the moment, it replied. These exact beetles weren't part of the welcome packet we received. If I had to guess, I'd say maybe a point, maybe less. That seemed low to me. Sure, these bugs weren't fast, but they had great defense and excellent attack. Actually, I just assumed their attack was excellent. Let's hope I didn't find out the hard way. I'm ready, Annabeth said. I quickly scooted back to be with her. She also knelt on the ground and connected with the earth. A few seconds later, a beetle arrived and she whacked it with her shillelagh. Even though I'd warned her what to expect, there was no substitute for first-hand experience. Her beetle deformed and snapped back into shape so fast it popped into the air like a spring-loaded toy. That's different, I laughed as it arced through the air and splashed down in the magic water. I hope it can swim. Actually, it turns out it couldn't, at least not in that water. Its legs waved frantically for a moment, and then it just dissolved, as in, it suddenly looked soft like jelly, then it turned into a thick liquid, then it faded away. The surface of the pond looked calm and flawless, as if it had never been disturbed at all. Jason, Annabeth gasped. Did you see that? Yes, I replied, and my voice shook. We were just drinking that. It could have burned our hand off, Annabeth said, or melted out our insides. Then she looked at me in horror. You said our watcher was waiting for something. Do you think he was waiting for us to disintegrate like that? Probably, I replied grimly. I think we were very lucky we had the mark of the deep earth and that the water liked us. The thought was disconcerting, but we still had beetles to vanquish. I had been spiking them while we'd been talking, and motioned for Annabeth to have another try. This time she did slightly better. She didn't kill it, but it didn't bounce into the air either. I don't I don't think these will be better, but let me give them a try, Annabeth said as she switched over to her short swords. They did fairly well, but only if she stabbed directly downward and hit them just right. The rounded chitin diverted her thrust if she didn't pierce them dead center. I kept taking out the majority of the beetles, giving Annabeth time to experiment and find the best attack that worked for her. Maybe a sonic strike would be better, she mused, switching back to her shillelaghs. I have all my magic back, and these beetles are much smaller. Hopefully I can do more with just a few hits. Hopefully I can do more than just a few hits. The idea proved to be a good one, although her first attempt was way overpowered. She radiated less sound than she had for an ant, but it was still too much. Her target shattered, sending shell and beetle juice over 10 feet away. There was no need to put that much effort into each pint-sized enemy, so she scaled it back and then scaled it back again. That gave her a nice pop and a small splatter, which seemed perfect to me. Annabeth vanquished a bunch of red eyes like that, but I could tell she still wasn't satisfied. It's still taking too much magic, she informed me. I'm going to adjust the sound and see if I can do better. I nodded and let her do her thing. She adjusted the frequency up and down the scale with a variety of success before she started using complex sounds. Annabeth began listening to the beetles intently as she hit them, almost like she was tapping watermelons in a grocery store, listening for ripeness. She went through a whole series of sounds before landing on something that seemed to suit her. I didn't notice any visual difference, but she was able to lower the volume of her sonic strikes even more. Finally, her strikes were so soft, the red eyes didn't splatter at all. They still died, though, and the dragonflies still collected their points. I think I've got it, Annabeth announced proudly. I'm hardly using any power, but it's still enough to take them out. It's not perfect, but now that I've gotten most of my magic refilled, I could do this for hours. That's great, I said encouragingly, and you are just in time, too. The pace of the red eyes have picked up, and I could use your help. Annabeth seemed to take in the rest of the room for the first time. Oh, Jason, I'm so sorry. I was having so much fun figuring out the best way to use my sonic strikes that I almost forgot what we were doing. That's okay, I laughed. I know what it's like to get involved in something new. After all, you waited patiently while I enhanced my bank crystal. I figured it was my turn to handle things while you were working out your stuff. It's just that we are facing a lot more beetles than we have before. I don't know how many there are going to be, but right now it feels like we're facing a huge nest, or colony, or whatever you call a group of beetles that live together. Annabeth expanded her efforts, and soon we were able to beat them back. Having her taking care of her side made a huge difference, and I felt like I could relax and have fun again. It sort of felt like I was in one of those tower defense games on the phone. The kind where a defensive row of towers is shooting down a never ending horde of zombies. We were even playing for points, just like in a game. Except that if we got overrun, these red eyes would take us apart one small chunk at a time. That would not be fun at all. Now I had a moment to focus. I turned to my soul creations to see if they could help with our current situation. Unfortunately, the answer was mostly negative. The beetles weren't light sensitive, so the flashers weren't able to help. The miners couldn't break apart their flexible chitin, and although the miners couldn't break apart their flexible chitin, although they were able to do some damage against the legs. It wasn't long before there was a whole group of beetles going around in circles because they were missing their legs on one side. It helped disrupt the flow of new red eyes, but it wasn't something I wanted to rely on. The Belchers had the most success. They imitated Annabeth's complex sound and were able to vanquish some of the red eyes on their own. They were slow to fire, though, as they had to breathe in fresh air and compress it before they could perform a sonic blast. When they fired, though, they were often able to vanquish a couple beetles in front of them and stun a few beetles beyond that. It was neat to see their abilities expand. Up to this point, I had been using them to make loud belching noises, and I had been relying on the volume of the sound to disorient my opponents. I quickly made a ring of belchers around us and used them to slow down the rate of the incoming beetles. I was very glad I did, as our enemy got smarter and a beetle made it through Annabeth's defense. Apparently, a beetle had hitched a ride on top of another beetle. Annabeth took out the top beetle and moved on, thinking that the enemy was handled. The bottom one continued to use the top one as cover, and it got inside her guard. I was on her far side where I couldn't reach. Otherwise, I'd have just spiked it myself. I wasn't too concerned, as I figured her shield charm could handle it until she figured out what had happened. It wasn't until Annabeth suddenly shrieked and leaped to her feet that I realized something was wrong. The red eye had taken a nasty chunk out of her lower leg. The wound wasn't big, but it was fairly deep. The bite had gone through her skin and into the muscle underneath. The bite wasn't fatal, but it was bleeding freely, and I'm sure the pain was raw and sharp. "Don't stop clearing them," I yelled, as Annabeth went wild and beat the crap out of the offending red eye. I kicked it into high gear to help out, and so did my soul creations. The damage had been done, though, and our carefully cleared perimeter collapsed. "What happened?" I asked all my magical creations, as Annabeth quickly got herself back together and started clearing red eyes. "The beetle wasn't enough of a threat to trigger her shield charm," my crystal spoke up. "That charm protects against fast-moving objects like a sword or an arrow. In this case, the beetle wasn't moving fast enough to be considered a threat. It also protects against magic attacks, but those beetles aren't really magic. They have been corrupted by magic, and they do have a tiny bit of magic inside, but they aren't powerful enough to trigger the defenses of the charm." Well, crap. Both of us had thought Annabeth was protected, when actually, she wasn't protected at all. I quickly messaged the update to Annabeth. "What can I do?" Annabeth asked. She sounded panicked, and I could see why. This battle had gone from a fun smash and bash to a high-risk engagement. "Hop on my back," I told her. "Red can protect both of us." "If I do that, then I can't hold down my own side of our defense," Annabeth said. "I can still help a bit, but it won't be the same." "You're right," I said, feeling the pressure of the moment, "and I'm not fast enough to keep back all the red eyes. The only other thing I can think of is to step into the pond and defend from there. That should buy us some time." "What if it melts our legs off?" Annabeth replied. She was still standing up, obviously afraid to sit back down again. She was smashing beetles like crazy, and for the moment we were holding them off. "I don't think it will," I replied as confidently as possible. "We have the mark of the deep earth, and for some reason it likes that. We need to decide quickly, though." As if to emphasize the importance of our decision, a beetle got through on my side. I had too many red eyes to spike, and it took that opportunity to put on a tiny burst of speed and reach me. Fortunately, Red and the Hex Network were up to the task. They flared their force runes and kept the beetle from finding any sort of purchase against my skin. The beetle slid off, like it had attacked a wall of air. I spiked it and didn't give it another chance to bite me, but I was very happy to see that Red had held up. Annabeth almost had another one get through before she stomped it flat. "Into the pool it is," she announced. "The sooner the better." "Good," I replied. "It's only a few steps away, so you dash for it while I hold them off." I guess the fear of being bitten was greater than the fear of melting, as Annabeth turned and immediately sprinted for the pond. The beetles were faster than I expected and swarmed after her. I held my position, spiking everything I could reach until Annabeth jumped into the water. I thought she would stay at the lip of the pool, but she immediately stepped into the deeper middle. The water came up to her waist, and the water came up to her waist, and she wasn't screaming or melting away, so I made my move. I dashed to the pool and jumped in with her. The water felt wonderful, slightly tingly and full of energy. Meanwhile, Annabeth had wasted no time. She was already bashing red eyes on the shore, so I quickly turned and got to work too. Massive increase in enemies my crystal warned. I looked, and a flood of new enemies was pouring out of the walls. Well, crap. I'd hoped the beetles we'd seen up to this point were the bulk of the colony. It didn't look like that was the case. We got problems, I told Annabeth. She looked up at the rest of the cavern and swore. There were so many of them, it looked like a carpet of angry red chitin heading our way. We can't defend against that, she exclaimed. I don't think that even the water will be able to stop that many, not if they swarm us. It gets worse, I said, and pointed behind us. Apparently, the beetles had figured out the water was toxic, and now they were building some sort of support structure to reach us. The beetle shells were not only good for defense, they were also capable of interconnecting, like they were built out of Legos. They had started with a base of about 10 beetles wide and 3 deep. Then more beetles had climbed on top for a second layer, but this layer was slightly offset, so the front beetles were over the water. A smaller third layer had formed, which hung over the water even more, and now they were making a fourth layer. Meanwhile, more beetles were joining the first layer, giving it more depth and stability. It didn't take a genius to see where this was going. With a good base, they could arc over the water and attack us, even in the center. We were toast, unless we figured out a new way of fighting. Spike punching had been fun, but we were beyond that now. Buy me some time, I said hurriedly. I have an idea. I was hoping you would say that, Annabeth replied, and began smashing apart the quickly forming bridge. This time she didn't limit her sonic abilities, and her blows blew apart 5 or 6 beetles at a shot. Their interlocking shells made a great support, but it also seemed to transmit sound well, too. I closed my eyes and let Annabeth do her thing as I dove into my throne room. Penny, bring up the template for the miner, I commanded. Penny gestured, and a life-size model appeared. It was a masterpiece of detail and artistry, and I'd spent over 100 hours working on it while I'd been buried in stone. Now I was getting ready to change it again. I'm sorry about this, I sent out to all my miners who were still working on stemming the tide. To me, a miner will always have a pickaxe, but that's just not enough anymore. Don't fret yourself, my lead miner said shortly. Just give us the tools for the job. That's what we need. I'm tired of bouncing off these boogers. I'm tired of bouncing off these buggers. I felt through my connection that he spoke for all of them. Sure, they were miners, but most of all, they were workmen. Tough little men made for tough jobs. They didn't care if they were swinging a pickaxe or pushing a jackhammer. They wanted to get the job done. Excellent, I replied. Right now you can pierce, but soon you'll be able to cut. The miners gave a hearty cheer as I took the template's pickaxe and got to work. First of all, I took its intention and changed it from a single tool into something that would morph into whatever I needed. It helped that I'd seen this in action with the wrecking crew and the path of the formless weapon. I kept the base of the pick consistent, so the miners would always have something firm to hold on to. The rest of it I modified so it could be whatever it wanted. And right now, what I wanted was for it to be a circular saw. I took the shaft, extended it about half the length of the miner, and then formed a large round circular blade. The blade could morph to have variable types of teeth, jagged, ripping teeth for softer materials like wood, and short, smoother teeth for hard surfaces like steel. I was the master of micro precision, so I made it as slender as my nano blades. After all, there was no sense in cutting through more material than it needed to. Finally, I added a safety housing to the part of the blade facing the miner. I didn't want the miner losing any fingers, or worse, while fighting the enemy. The housing part also doubled as the blade sharpener, blade repair, and blade spinner. Now, if the miners faced something tough enough to tear up their saws, they could just let the blade spin freely for a moment, and it would repair and resharpen itself. Lastly, I made the saw perfectly balanced, so the blade could spin at thousands of revolutions per minute and not twist or vibrate. I felt nothing but excitement and anticipation for my mining crew as I prepared to add it to the template and triangle in all the detail. Assuming underwater configuration, the bank crystal announced as I felt my super suit shift. Frog mode. Enough sustainable air available for 5 minutes, it continued as I felt Annabeth grab me and knock me off my feet. Suit ability to process air from magic water is unknown. Defensive ability of magic water against this many red eyes is unknown. I paused my modifications for a split second to look outside myself and see how the battle was going. It wasn't going well. In fact, I would dare to say it was going terribly. The incoming swarm had arrived at the small pond and quickly circled it. The fresh beetles had linked shells and quickly started building bridges from every side. Annabeth had knocked them down as quickly as possible, but the base of the bridge had merged, and now there was an almost completed dome. We were seconds away from having beetles in our faces when Annabeth switched tactics and took us underwater. For a moment, we had a stalemate, as the beetles were unwilling to go underwater to get us. No, that wasn't right. The Watcher was unwilling for the beetles to swamp the pond. Curious. What was also curious was a small glowing crystal jutting up from the floor of the pond. It was on the far side by the plant, and it oozed power. If I had to guess, this was why the water in the pond was so powerfully charged. The glowing crystal spoke with the soft chimes of the earth, and it talked of being a part of something greater. I sensed a tiny thread leading deep underground, and I almost followed it. Survival was much more important than curiosity, though, and I sternly pulled my attention back to the project at hand. Before, when I had been buried in stone, I'd spent days working on this miner, and it had over 14,000 triangles of meticulous detail. It wasn't perfect, but I would put it up against the best character rendering of any game out there. I'd added the details by splitting each triangle one at a time, which was a surprisingly fun and soothing task. But it was time consuming, and the one thing I didn't have right now was time. I'd also made the miner before I'd made my surfer dudes, which were made of blocks, and before I'd upgraded my bank crystal. Now I had an idea of a much faster way of enhancing its detail. I quickly took a few of the triangles already present on the new saw and split them all in half. Then I did it again and again and again. I took a moment to fully feel this new high density section and experience it in every way possible. I let it resonate with all my senses. Then I gently sang it out to the rest of the miner. I felt it enhance all the details present and even added in new characteristics. The miner now had pores in his skin, and the threads in his clothes now had details of their own. It didn't feel as huge of a visual update as when I'd first worked on him in Carl's cave, but it was still pretty amazing. Save the template, Penny, I said, then let me know how many triangles it has now. Penny paused for a moment. The miner now has a little over 230,000 triangles, she reported. Dear God, that was a lot. It was also going to take a huge amount of magic to fill it up. Come here and bring everyone else in your crew, I instructed the lead miner. I quickly peeked at the rest of the cavern. The Beetles, or the Watcher, hadn't figured out what to do yet, so I still had time. I pulled my super suit away from the lower half of my body so my skin could have direct contact with the water. The upper half of the suit held all my air, so I didn't want to mess with that. The tingling increased, and I felt like I was taking a bath in Sprite. It felt wonderful, though, like I was a guest at a fancy spa or at a chalet in the mountains, and this was one of their radical treatments to tone and rejuvenate my skin. This time I didn't drink the water. Instead, I inhaled the magic through contact alone. When I'd been trapped in stone, I'd gotten awfully good at charging and repairing my miners and Ass Blaster 2000s. All they'd had to do was touch any part of me, and I could project the power and repairs they needed. By the time I'd escaped, I could charge over I could charge over 100 soul creations at one time. This was very much like that, only the inverse. Instead of projecting magic from touch, I was absorbing it. I took a moment to get it right, but soon a flood of fresh earth magic was coursing through my system. That brought its own set of problems as I was now pulling in magic water faster than my marks could process it. Oh, I was pulling in water magic faster than my marks could process it. I didn't have time to waste, so I converted the overflow myself. That wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. The water was heavy on the aspect of earth, so in a weird way, it was literally hard water. I chuckled at my own humor, and that seemed to help ground the new magic to me even faster. The magic had a mind of its own, though, and it really wanted to meet the mark of the deep earth. Its second choice was the mark of the Lagarel. As for me, it felt like I was just some sort of mage servant for the real stars of the show. I could only promise the new magic that if it became part of my magic, then it could visit the marks any time it wanted. That, more than my regular Superman invitation, seemed to work best. I tried not to be offended that it thought so little of me. Instead, I focused on being grateful that it wasn't melting me down to a nice goo. I couldn't help but pick up impressions from the magic, and it seemed like it was the time and it seemed like it was the tiniest drop of a much bigger river far underground. I got images of a magic waterway as big as the Ohio River, flowing thick like lava in the mantle of the earth. I think it's talking about a ley line, my analytical side spoke up. That's a real thing? I asked, surprised. It seems to be, he replied in his best Sherlock Holmes voice. The basic concepts match, so let's call it a ley line till we have evidence to the contrary. Ley lines. Wow. No wonder the magic was hard to convert. In fantasy stories, ley lines are the source of tremendous power, which comes from the land itself. In the tales, mages usually can't tap ley lines directly. It's too powerful and it burns them out. They usually need special enhancements or enchantments in order to tap even a small part of it. And your enchantment is your marks, my analytical side said smugly. See, it all fits. You're so smart, I told him, and gave him an imaginary chocolate ice cream cone with 3 scoops. He loved to hear how right he was, so I got a big grin as he accepted the cone and started licking away. Sometimes he's so smug he's insufferable, but he's also saved me many times before, so it was good to be nice to him. All right, so this is the end of the chapter, and obviously they are in the middle of the action, so we will continue on next time, and I will see you guys then. All right, take care.